Dear social worker, welcome to the podcast that prioritizes the person behind the title, social worker. I'm your host, Lisa Ran, and I'm here to offer you and encourage you to give you insights to enhance your self-care and your professional practice. I went from over a decade in social work to a leadership development coach for social workers nationwide, where I offer a safe and independent space for reflection and to help you overcome personal or professional challenges. Today, we're going to talk about strategies for overcoming burnout, and also we're going to look at the importance of knowing your self-care language. Let's talk. Welcome to the sounds of my garden. You may be hearing some birds in the background, and it's such a beautiful day. We've had such a beautiful week. I thought it would be lovely to record outside, given the title of the podcast today as well. We're going to do things slightly differently, and we're going to start with some celebrations. And I want to celebrate three things today. First of all, I want to give a shout out to the Dear Social Worker and Mentor podcast who've been nominated for an award for the BASWA Journal Awards. I'm so happy for them. I know I'll be doing some work with him later on this year, but also it's a fantastic opportunity that BASWA have capitalised on there. It's important that we recognise those that are reporting positively on social work practice, because we know there's some fantastic practice happening out there, some great sacrifices that are being made to ensure that we are supporting vulnerable groups. So it's key that this award show takes place. So congratulations to the Social Work and Mentor podcast. The next two things I want to celebrate is, one of them is me actually. So I received an email some time back. I actually should have reported on it back then, but I received an email within 4 weeks of me starting my podcast. And if you're new here, I started on the 28th of March this year. And I received an email to confirm that I'd reached number 50 in the careers category on Apple Podcasts, which I think is an amazing achievement in such a short amount of time. So thank you to Podstats for giving me a shout out on that and letting me know how the podcast is doing. And thank you to everyone that listens. And lastly, another celebration is that I also received an award for Birmingham's #1 coach, which is very exciting. I received an award for the second year in a row from Influence Digest. So I'm so pleased to hear about that. So if I've ever been your coach in the past, or I'm your coach now, you are rocking with the #1 in Birmingham. How excited. Those are the celebrations for this week. Let's talk. Self-care has become a bit of a buzzword in recent years, right? It's oversaturated, it's overused, even I'm using it. But it seems to be a word that we all seem to understand what it means. Putting it into practice seems to be more challenging. But have you ever considered what your self-care language is? Right? Because we all have different preferences, communication styles, learning styles, problem-solving styles. But what's your self-care language? So in this section of the podcast, we're going to talk about and explore the concept of self-care language. We're going to magnify that and really flesh out what does that really mean and how it can actually influence our well-being. And I think by us understanding and embracing our self-care language, we can unlock the key to self-nourishment and lead to more fulfilling lives or self-care routines. So number one is, I'm going to give you 5 tips. Number one is defining self-care language, right? So let's be clear. Your self-care language involves the ideas or concepts around activities, practices, and experiences that resonate with you on a personal level to contribute and maintain your well-being, right? It's a reflection of your individuality, your values, and your needs. So think of this, and we're going to cover some pyramid style models later. But think of it as a pyramid: your individuality, your values, and your needs. The self care language is your unique way that you communicate with who? You, right? So, just as languages vary among different cultures, your self care language may differ from those around you, and recognizing and embracing that language for you is going to help you have that personalized approach that works, because self-care is ongoing, it's consistent, it needs to be long term, right? And often what I've found is self-care can be as a moment in time. We treat it as a just a treat. It's not a luxury. Self-care is not a luxury. Self-care should be standard. That should be part of your routine. Yeah, it's got to be satisfying and meaningful to you. So understanding what your language is going to be able to help you maintain it long term. Number two, you've got to uncover what your self-care preferences are. And I'm going to share with you the different types of self-care later on in this podcast. So you've got some ideas that you can take back with you. And as I said, I've got a treat later on as well if you listen to the end. But discovering your self-care language will involve a level of self-reflection and exploration. And I think you've got to start by reflecting on activities or experiences that already bring you some form of joy or relaxation or rejuvenation and all the Asians, right? Think about what makes you feel most alive, what makes you feel most centered, what makes you feel most at peace. So we're going to talk about the different types of self-care and give you some strategies later, but start thinking about these questions now. What do you most enjoy? And you may be wondering, why am I have such a passion for this? It's because I've been burnt out. I think I explained that in my last podcast episode, but also in my last Instagram live that I did a couple of weeks ago. It was an issue for me that I wasn't prioritizing myself. I got on the runaway train of CP conferences and crisis intervention and literally forgot about myself. Literally. I don't even know how I got there. I was so focused on making sure I was there for everyone else. And that is key. That is a key part of the job. That is why we're there. But you can't pour from an empty cup. You've got to fill yourself up. And self-care is filling yourself before you're pouring into someone else. You can't pour from an empty cup. And if you do, over time, you're absolutely going to burn out, right? So uncovering your self-care preferences was actually something I had to relearn. I had to relearn what that was for me, what that looked like for me, what senses made me feel most alive, right? Or what made me feel most at peace. So that's what I'm getting you to think about here. Pay attention to what activities make you feel nourished and fulfilled. And we're going to start building around that by the end of this podcast. Number three, you must have heard this before, but it's true. Listening to your inner voice, right? Your self-care language is absolutely not determined by societal expectations or trends. It's about listening to your inner voice and honoring your authentic needs. Authentic needs, right? This is when no one else is around, no one else can judge, no one else can see what's happening. This is just you, yourself, and you. You've got to be somewhat mindful of the messages your body and your mind send to you. Notice when you feel drained or stressed or overwhelmed. Listen to what your inner voice, wait for it, listen to what your inner voice is asking for. Now, there's a question. What is your inner voice asking for? You know that when you are asking this question, it already is a signal that you need to engage in activities that are aligned with your self-care language. Trust yourself. There's a whole podcast episode we've got to do on that. Trust yourself and prioritizing self care. It's an essential part of your overall well being. So it's key that you are listening to your inner voice and asking, what do you need? If you're listening to me on Spotify, don't forget you can get involved with some reflection questions on the Interact tab. So don't forget to click that. So, number 4, experimenting and adapting. So, as we know, you've got to think about your self care language, but you have to consider the fact that it's not fixed. As you evolve, as you grow and change, you're going to have to allow yourself the freedom to experiment with different activities and practices to find out what truly resonates with you, what works for you, right? So when you're experimenting and adapting with your self-care language, that means you're going to have to be open to trying new things. You're going to have to be patient with yourself as you explore. It's absolutely fine to adapt and refine your self-care routine. Of course you can change it. Why not? It's got to suit you. You've got to find that language, right? And while you are searching for something, while you're on that quest, it's likely you're going to make changes. It's likely you're going to find what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what you prefer, etc. What worked for you in the past, what worked for you 5 years ago, may not work now. Your lifestyle may have changed. Your access to amenities may have changed. So you've got to embrace the journey of self-discovery and adapt your self-care practices as you gain that deeper understanding of your needs. Lastly, number 5, embracing your self-care language. Self-care language and embracing that is an act of self-love and self-compassion. Again, we've got to do podcast episodes on those, right? It means that you recognize your well-being is unique and important, and you're giving yourself permission to prioritize self-care activities that align with your self-care language, right? So we're talking about here releasing any guilt, comparison to others, and being able to focus and zero in on what truly nourishes you, right? By embracing your self-care language, you are honoring your authentic self and you are creating a pathway to greater self-fulfillment and happiness. So once you find that language, embrace it, because it's a powerful tool that can help to transform the relationship you have with yourself and enhance your overall well-being. Take the time to explore, experiment, and listen to that inner voice. Remember that question you need to ask yourself? Embrace the self-care language with love and compassion, and it's going to guide you. It's going to tell you exactly what you need. Just trust the voice when you hear it. Dear social workers, if you want to connect with me, you can on Instagram at Dear Social Worker Podcast and on LinkedIn, Lisa Rann Edwards. It will be great to connect with you, and we'll be opening up the podcast soon for guests. And I too will be appearing on other podcasts too. So if you would like me to speak at your event or on your podcast, if you are interested in coaching, if you visit one of my social media channels, you will have direct access to book your own coaching session, to join in our group sessions, and of course, to connect with me. Look forward to hearing from you. Through my research, I found there are 9 different types of self care. And I'm going to walk you through all of them, giving you some ideas to get you started on your self-care journey and to begin a self-care routine. I'm going to name each of the categories, give you a couple of ideas, and hopefully that helps you get started. So first of all, I want to talk about practical self-care. So for example, paying your bills on time or creating a budget. These are practical things that you can do to ensure that you're staying on top of things. Number two, professional self-care. So attending professional development opportunities, accessing coaching to enhance your professional practice, asking to be paid what you're worth, negotiating the best rate for the role that you're in. That's professional self-care, because that's giving yourself the message that you are valued, you are worthy, right? So when you are advocating for yourself, which is another podcast episode, if you listen to some previous episodes, there's a 2-part series on advocating for yourself. You can do that on a professional level. Number 3, social self-care. So connecting with a group that focuses on your interests or hobbies, or even just connecting with other social workers. I've got that in my group called the Social Work Coaching Hub. There's a group of us that are going to be meeting on a regular basis so we can connect with other social workers and I can connect you with each other. Sometimes being in a space where you have shared experiences lightens the load. And in some ways, I refer to it kind of like a masterclass, because you're going to get the best in the business that are giving you tips and advice and support. And these are people that have walked where you've walked, felt how you felt, been where you've been. It's the best form of, in my view, social self-care. But that's what works for me. And that's why that's a service that I provide for others also. But I think being in that shared space with that shared experience, priceless. Again, social could also be going out. I know in a lot of my coaching sessions, the social workers say to me, you know what, I'm going to book something for myself. I'm going to book something with my friends, or I'm going to book something with my husband, whatever it is, as long as it, at the core of it, is social. Emotional self-care. How about journaling, counseling, allowing yourself to feel your feelings? So often in social work, you just move from one to the other. I remember it so well, where you will go from a direct work session with a 3-year-old, for example, to as disclosure at school, followed by a conflict with a professional, followed by being accountable to your manager, and then having to attend a conference. And that can all happen in one day, plus more, right? So within that day, you're processing and going through a lot of emotions, and you're holding a space for other people's emotions as well. And that inadvertently I've found, as I've delved more into coaching social workers over the years, it inadvertently has trained us to not see ourselves. And it's inadvertently giving a message to the brains that, you know, what we need doesn't matter because we have to be there. So emotional self-care, I would say, is one of the most important, if not the important type of self-care you need to maximize. And again, that's part of the reason why I provide the coaching service, because it provides that space for reflection. Number 5, mental self-care, right? So it might be learning something new. It might be taking a break from social media. I know I've done that sometimes. It's amazing the difference it makes when you're not taking in as much information. You know, it makes a massive difference to, that's what happened for me anyway. Let me move on. We've got a few to get through. Physical, so exercise. I remember when I was training in Nottingham, I was in the duty and assessment team there when I first trained, when I was green. And there was a lady there, I'll never forget her. And she was, always looking swish and had her heels on. And, she's real fly. And I used to compliment her. And she said to me one time, she's like, Lisa, it's simply because I have to go to the gym once I've finished a working day. She looked at me, she said, I have to. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm looking at her thinking she looks fabulous, and, she wore all these bright colors and everything. She just looked great and she was always glowing. But it's interesting that what you see on the outside, and technically what I was seeing was surface, what was happening on the inside is that she was trying to manage her emotions, manage her self-care, and her language to herself was physical self-care. If that's you, think about not just exercise, but just staying hydrated. That might sound really simple, but if you had a day like the one I've just described, that's really hard to do. You're in and out of the car like a yo-yo. It's difficult to drink water throughout the day, every single day. You might manage to do it some days, but not others. So again, being aware of your self-care language. Okay, so let's look at self-care for the soul. This is my favorite one because this is where you are getting in tune with your senses. And what I've found to be most effective when speaking to social workers about what their self-care language is in the coaching sessions, it definitely sits with self-care for the soul. So it could be any of these. I'm just going to throw a few ideas out. Looking at setting personal boundaries, essential oils, listening to your favorite music, dance, going out in nature like I am today, lighting a candle. All of these things are good for the soul. So think about what self-care for the soul looks like for you and if that is part of your self-care language. Okay. What about acts of service? So doing or arranging things for yourself that make you feel good. So this is a type of love language, similar to what we talked about at the very beginning. It's a type of love language, but I want to extend that into self-care. What about receiving gifts? Treating yourself by buying something that makes you happy. I attended a networking event last week and I was sharing how much I love loose leaf tea. Don't ask me why. I just love blending loose leaf tea. So I've got my mint leaves, I've got my hibiscus, I've got my eucalyptus, and I love trying different blends. And that's just something that I enjoy. That's quite sensory because of the smell of the tea, etc., etc. So receiving a gift for me would be buying a new teapot, which I did over the weekend. Guilty. Right. So that was my gift to myself as part of my self-care routine. So when I'm boiling the tea and the aroma is in the house and then I'm pouring the tea, all of that, that's exciting to me. But it was quite funny because in the network meeting, when I said that, there was a whole bunch, it was a coaches network meeting, and there's a whole bunch of coaches that held up their mugs and said, me too. And then there was a full, blown discussion about loose leaf tea. So who knew? Who knew it could be end up being a social self-care moment? Words of affirmation. So giving yourself a bit of a pep talk. Do you do that? Do you talk positively to yourself? I want to amplify this element of the podcast and just talk about this here. I want to give you some idea what that sounds like. Often in my coaching sessions, I find that social workers' self-talk is unhelpful to their growth. It's unhelpful to where they want to go and who they want to be in their personal life or their professional life, depending on the reason why they've come to coaching. So this is what it should sound like. I am in charge of my life. I will become better. Everything will work out just fine. I hear that one a lot. And when you're in the midst of, I don't know, care proceedings, I remember my first set of care proceedings actually, 6 children. I never forget it. Never forget it now. 6 children, 6 sets of care plans. You've got it. You've got it. Can you imagine? And you're fairly green at that time. Um, yeah, but someone said to me, I never forget at that time, oh, everything will work out just fine. You're like, yeah, but it's not you going through it, right? And it's so easy to say that, and to an extent, of course, absolutely, it is true. But at this moment in time, bringing up the word faith is appropriate. Saying that type of phrase is about you having some kind of faith that it will work out, faith that you're full of hope and strength, faith that your efforts will soon pay off. Because if you knew for a fact that that would happen, you wouldn't need faith, right? So if you know what's going to happen when you get to the end of the road, you don't need faith to get to the end of the road. So you're going to miss out on the character building. You're going to miss out on the wisdom that you learn. You're going to miss out on the experience of it all if you already know the ending. So faith is necessary when you are in positions where things are challenging and things are tough, and we know those days will come. But in the midst of that, there's a space that has to be found for positive self-talk or for implementing your self-care language and routine. That is going to require faith. That is not something that you can see, hear, feel, and touch. That's a knowing, that's a self-belief. And when you get to a place where you can accept that some of these things that I'm inviting you to think about, when you get to a place when you can accept, you may not be able to see it straight away or know that that will be the end result, but you have faith in that strategy. That's when things will become a bit easier for you. Okay, so last 2 things. So we've covered the 9 types in total. What I'm doing here is just fleshing some of them out a bit, right? So talking about your self-love language, acts of service, receiving gifts, words of affirmation, physical touch. Lastly, we want to talk about quality time. That means quality time with yourself, right? Hobbies, interests, meditation, taking yourself out on a date. I've seen a lot of people do that on TikTok, actually. And some people take themselves on hotel dates and they'll just go for a night or two and spend time in a hotel in a beautiful countryside, make their own routine for that time, which is a beautiful thing to do if you have an opportunity to do that. Taking yourself off. Relaxation. What do you like to do to relax? Lastly, I want to share with you some affordable self-care ideas. And this is something that you can implement alongside deciding what your self-care language is, what works for you. And if within that self-care routine you have to spend some money to do that, I just want to give you a few ideas just to get you started. Big one, And this has helped a lot of social workers when we talk about it in coaching sessions. Journaling, getting it out of your head. It's so powerful. But if writing isn't for you, maybe talking therapy is. And most people that end up in my coaching sessions, talking is what works for them, not writing. But they may end up writing, and being accountable to me as their coach works as a formula. But talking in the first instance is what they recognize works for them. Trying different types of breath work, putting on some music. We've all got access to YouTube, right? Sounds so simple, but I put on an old album the other day, old school album that I used to listen to, and it brought me so much joy. Okay, this may be a big one for some of you social workers because you can be super organized at work. When you get home, you may need to clean, right? Had a few sessions over the past couple of weeks where the social worker said, my house is an absolute tip. You know, I'm doing my best, I'm giving my all. I just don't actually have time for my own space. It's amazing what happens when you clean the space where you work or the space where you frequent the most. Set yourself some form of decluttering routine. If that's something you need help with, I can certainly help you with that. Just reach out to me on Instagram, on LinkedIn. Okay, what about changing the layout of your home? The office where you work, where you've got where you're working from home at the hybrid model. Give it a change. Buy a plant, maybe. Taking a warm bath, calling a friend or a loved one, taking a nap, thinking about things that you're thankful for, going for a walk in nature, spending time in the garden. These are all affordable ideas that do pull in the different senses, particularly for, if you're a kinesthetic learner, you can mix and match these senses to suit your self-care language. I want to remind you that your adult attachment style may also be linked to the type of self-care language that you have and the positive self-talk that you have or you're working towards. If you haven't listened to that episode, it's called Attachment Informed Self-Care. And I think that would be in your interest to listen to that and then listen to this. You'll notice that my podcast episodes, they build on each other. So there's a thread running all the way through. I think having that understanding of your attachment style will help you in working out what works best for you, what your self-care routine should be, or of course to enhance your current self-care routine. The other thing I would like to add and to remind you is that I have a free ebook, Exploring Your Attachment Style. It's an ebook for social workers, and you can access that by going straight to my Instagram page at Dear Social Worker Podcast, and you can go to my LinkedIn at Lisa Ann Edwards, and you will be able to click the link in the bio, and you can access that download. Feel free. We've had I can't think of the number now, but we've had so many people download that already and found it extremely useful. So I would encourage you to do so. And so you can build on your self-care routine. You've got some building blocks and a foundation to do that. If you would like to speak to me about coaching, being part of your event, speaking to your team, that is something that I am now opening up to do that. Get in contact with me through email, info@socialworkcoachinghub.com. But you can access me through Spotify and Instagram and all of that, and I can give you the links to make those inquiries. Dear social worker, as you know, Social work, it's fast paced, it's demanding, and taking care of ourselves has become more crucial than ever. And even though self care is a buzzword, we know that, but it's not just a flashing trend as they're, on social media, how it looks on social media sometimes. It's a fundamental cornerstone aspect of maintaining our well being. But as we know, and as we've talked about today, it's not a one size fits all approach. You've got to work out what works for you, what's your individual unique needs, what's your preferences, what's your language. Yeah. And the concept of self care language, you've got to build that in. You've got to think about your attachment style, being aware of when you're approaching burnout. All of these podcast episodes, they're building on one another, as I've said. So thinking about all those elements is what's going to help you have the most effective routine. And there's 5 reasons why it's key that you save this podcast episode, that you share this podcast episode if you know there's someone who would benefit from this, if you think this would work well in your team meeting, share it, because some people haven't thought about or had the opportunity to think about or even aware of self-care language, what that means, how it actually influences our well-being and the way that we look after ourselves. So number 1, recognizing personal needs. Yeah, you've got to be able to recognize your own needs. And that's what we looked at in part 1 of this series. You've got to think about not only what it looks like when you're approaching burnout, but also what do you need to maintain self-care / avoid burnout. Yeah. Number 2, empowerment and self-awareness. So discovering your self-care language empowers you to take charge of your own well-being, developing that deeper sense of self-awareness, understanding what brings you joy, peace, contentment. When you have this knowledge, you're in a very powerful position because you can make intentional choices that align with your unique needs, values, and desires. Your needs, values, and desires. Think of that as the hierarchy of needs, right? Number 3, effective stress management. Stress is part of the job. So therefore, you need some form of plan. You need a plan because stress is an omnipresent factor, not just in personal lives, but in our professional lives. And the negative impact on our physical and mental health, we know, is absolutely undeniable. Right? That's why we're talking about this topic. That's why it matters. But knowing your self-care language will equip you with effective tools for stress management. That's why I say it's key. Share this episode. Don't keep it to yourself. Let someone else in on how they can better care for themselves. We all know a social worker. We all know a social work manager that is struggling either emotionally or physically, or just finding things very challenging. And an episode like this can really open up their mind to the idea of what is their self-care language. Even just planting that seed is enough for them to start that journey themselves. Number 4, enhanced personal relationships. Number 1, it's the relationship with yourself. That comes first. Pour into your cup first, and then you're able to pour out. But it's also about fostering healthier relationships with others. So when you understand your self-care language, you can effectively communicate your needs to others, professionally or personally. Yeah. And that can help create an environment that supports your well-being and encourages others to respect your boundaries. Number 5, we talked about this briefly, long-term sustainability. Self-care is not a quick fix. It's a long-term thing. Yeah, it's not a temporary solution. It's long-term. It needs a plan. Just like when you say to parents, actually, we're going to recommend that the CP plan continues because we have outstanding work, and or we're stepping down because we need to monitor that the implementation is going to continue, right? It's the exact same principle. You want to know on a long-term basis that the changes that have been implemented are going to be sustained, right? We love that language in social work. It's got to be maintained or sustained. We haven't been able to measure progress, etc., etc., right? You've got to switch that on yourself. Because the moment that you do that, then you are looking at long-term sustainability and trying to find ways to engage in activities that truly nourish and fulfill you. And that's going to lead to a sustainable self-care routine that becomes integral to your lifestyle. So you've got to align your self-care practice with your personal needs, your self-care language, and you then can cultivate and maintain a self-care routine that supports your well-being in the long run, because that is key. It's got to be maintained in the long run. We've covered a lot of ground today, right? So we talked about types of self-care language, the importance of knowing your self-care language, the importance of being aware of what you need, asking yourselves the right questions. If you go onto the interact button on Spotify, if you're listening via Spotify, you can interact there and answer some follow-up questions to get you started. And I said at the beginning that I've got a treat for you, right? So if you listen to this episode, I want you to DM me on LinkedIn or IG. I want you to DM me the word self-care and the letter J. Self-care and the letter J. I will have a treat for everyone who's listened to this episode right to the end. And I think it's key that you have access to a resource that supports you. And I want to be able to do that. As I said, we now have the Social Work Coaching Hub where you can join our group discussions. You can access one-to-one coaching with me. You can download ebooks. Just get involved. There's so many things on there. If you want me to be part of your podcast or event, you can also contact me there as well. But please DM me that word I told you with that letter, and you will have a treat from me. So God bless. Great speaking with you today. And we will be back again, building on everything we've already learned. And we'll soon be having some guests on the show. So that'll be exciting. Thanks once again. Great to speak with you. I will see you soon.